Well, it's a pleasure to be here tonight at home at the Western Heritage Center, and it's always a pleasure to speak with my co-author, Brad Courtney. We have a lot of fun, and we do seem to get a crowd here and there, and we're very gratified by the attendance here tonight. I'm going to be talking about The Dam, the Drunk, and the Disaster. It's one of the chapters in Brad's and my latest book, True Tales of Prescott. And if you're familiar with the chapter, I will be revealing some stuff that's not in there. And if you're not familiar with the chapter, I'll be omitting stuff that is in there. So anyway, before we start with The Dam, the Drunk, and the Disaster, there is one thing that is on my mind. I have taken people through and explained our exhibits, and I tell them about the rodeo, and many people have come up and said, well, the Payson has the longest consecutive rodeo. Thank you for letting me get that off my chest. There will be more research and perhaps a Days Past article in the future on that one. Oh, anyway, let's move on with our thing today. Besides being the largest piece of solid masonry in the United States, the Walnut Grove Dam, completed around October of 1887, also drained the largest watershed in the world, 400 square miles of territory. Wherever the rain fell, it would eventually come up against that dam. The story of the dam began in 1881 when two brothers from New York, Wells and DeWitt Bates, bought a gold mine in southern Yavapai County and filed 63 claims for placer mining rights along the Hassayampa River. This way they were able to plan for the lake that would be there because they owned all the placer rights along the river that was going to be covered up by the lake. The brothers found investors and construction on the dam began in 1886. However, the two quickly learned that they could make more money selling stock than really working on this project of theirs. And they began to cut costs on the production of the dam. Right, the next one there. Thank you. Yes, cost cutting. The dam was never a solid structure. This is it under construction. An 1888 article in Engineering News described the construction. It said, a timber trestle was built on the longitudinal axis of the dam, as you can see, and this was gradually raised as the work progressed, and timbers being left as they built up. So this line of timbers that had the rail on it, they would leave those in there and just pile on top of it. The shortcuts and cost cutting became a priority. And when they basically came over, dumped some loose granite boulders, and then when it reached the height that they wanted, they would cover it up over masonry. Now on the riverside, the lake side, they put a lot of waterproofing material. They used paraffin paint and tar paper and that sort of thing to try to, make it waterproof on that side, but they did nothing to waterproof the downriver side. Next one there. All right, during construction, there were a couple of problems. At one point, there was an explosion, a premature blast that injured a couple of workers, and also the flu attacked the working camp there, and 20% of the staff were out with the flu, and 2 actually died from the flu when they were there. Even at the outset, the construction of the dam was criticized. In fact, engineers of the Technical Survey of the Pacific Coast had publicly criticized the dam as a structure full of blunders, mainly caused by company officers in New York. Other critics believed the concrete and the lumber used were of inferior quality. Furthermore, whatever abilities the mostly unskilled workers on the project possessed were frequently befuddled, mostly by too much time spent in saloons and gambling joints. Also, additionally, there was criticism because the chief engineer wasn't there all the time. And the chief engineer, it's an interesting story because one would think that the chief engineer of this disaster would get a great deal of blame. But in fact, he really pretty much got off scot-free. That chief engineer was none other than Alexander O. Oswald Brody, which might sound a little familiar to some of you. He, along with John Marion and Bucky O'Neill, founded the Rough Riders. That's why he's here with Teddy Roosevelt. That was a reunion in New York, and they're obviously greeting each other. Teddy put on some weight since his war days there, I think. But anyway, he was also the 15th governor of the territory of Arizona. So in spite of this disaster and in spite of him being the chief engineer, he pretty much came out without a scratch as far as that goes. Yeah, pardon me, thank you. All right, it is around 4 p.m. on Friday, the 21st, when Superintendent Thomas H. Brown finally decided that he should warn residents downriver of the impending danger. The water, it had been raining for days, and the water was filling up, and the spillway was not big enough to take the extra water to keep the water from topping the dam. A few settlers and a sizable number of miners were scattered in the canyon below the dam, and there was also a lower dam which was under construction by the same company downriver as well. So Brown ordered one of his employees, a man by the name of Dan Burke, a prospector and miner who was supposed to be familiar with the country, to mount a horse and make the 22-mile ride by trail to Fool's Gulch Camp to notify the people that the main dam might soon wash out. In doing so, Brown made two mistakes. One, he chose Burke, who was a known drunk, and two, he paid him in advance. According to the miner, Brown cautioned Burke, "Now, Dan, you will not stop on the road," to which Burke replied, "Oh no, Mr. Brown, I will promise you I will not." And then Burke mounted a horse, which was given to him, a good fine horse, and he started his mission by first going to a saloon and having a little nip to fight off against the cold in February. But one drink followed another, and soon he was too drunk even to walk. Meanwhile, back at Walnut Grove, Superintendent Brown, ladder in hand, paced nervously but cautiously at the dam site. He was helpless to do anything, but he was the guy who was supposed to report on what happened to the company, so he had to sit there. His rain-soaked vigil started around 8 p.m. Friday when the lake water just started trickling over the top of the dam at 8 p.m. Then, come midnight, he sat there and watched for 6 hours, and by the water just kept rising and rising. Some workers tried to expand the spillway, but it was too late, and the water actually went into the spillway and broke it apart. And finally, come around midnight, the water was going over the dam 3 feet deep, over the top of the dam, onto the unprotected, unwaterproofed side downstream. Then the newspaper wrote, "Then an immense steel cable reaching from the tower to the bank broke with a loud report, and a ball of fire seemed to shoot from it. The midnight watchers were startled by it and at first thought a box of giant powder had exploded. The next instant, the tower that the cable was connected to started to teeter and finally went over, and then the entire dam, as they said, as a unit, began to march down the canyon for a few like bunny hops before the thing completely exploded, causing a sound that could be heard for miles, and it even shook the earth. A 100-foot tall mountain-born tsunami was embarking, and nothing on this earth was going to stop it. The boulders that made up the dam then became the grit that would scour out all visible life out of that canyon. The only life that was there after the disaster was probably microscopic. There were the people who were in the area got buried by just 10 or 20 feet of sand and timber and boulders. Next slide, please. The 100-foot wall of water laden with boulders and debris boiled down the high bank canyon below the dam site, and it took 2 hours to drain that lake, which is a remarkably quick time. And there were boats on the lake, and usually as a lake would drain, the boats would sort of follow along. But the lake drained so fast that the boats just fell onto the mud. They couldn't even drain down along with the rest of the water. In the canyon between the two dams, there were quite a large number of cabins, all of which with their unfortunate human occupants who were carried down to death and destruction by the rushing flood. In about a half hour, the wall of water had traveled the 22 miles to that lower dam, which was still under construction, and the witnesses say it swept away like chaff before a hurricane. It was nothing compared to that wall of water.